I think a love language for me is using my like professional knowledge of the law um, to like I think you know marginalized people, very very vulnerable people in society need people with myriad skills, right? Like need people that are um, like therapists and lawyers, I think too, doctors, teachers, educators, and it this sort of goes back to why I was drawn to law school, but I do love like the process, like the day to day of like writing a brief or like the process, like civil procedure. I'm like a nerd and I find that really interesting. And to be able to use those skills that I find fun to serve like a humanistic purpose. And I think that's advocacy.
Welcome to Therapy for the World, an interview series with people working across the spectrum of self-care and world care. I'm Dan Sicorsky, a writing teacher and therapist, and the other voice you hear is Mila Sicorsky, an incoming deportation defense attorney, local community organizer, and my sister. We recorded this on June 29th, 2025, at 6:45 in the evening. Here's our conversation. One question that I want to start with, it's especially interesting to start with you, is a question that pulls us back in time. And I'd love to know if you can point to something in I was going to say our, but your childhood, your childhood or upbringing, whether person, event, experience, anything that helped you become who you are today.
Hmm. Let me think. This is, this is the first time I'm like thinking about this right now, but for some reason, it's the first thing that came up. So Dan and I, had I'd call her like our adoptive grandmother, but she was our nanny growing up, Marta, a wonderful, wonderful person. And I guess one day Dan was like misbehaving or something as a small child. And she was like, well, like, do you want to go to prison? That's where like the bad people are. And I remember like the look of just like extreme fear on your face and on my face. And I I think about that right now because I am going to be a defense attorney, hopefully, doing immigration removal defense, like deportation defense. So, not criminal defense, but I think that there is this like tacit assumption in society that like people are in conditions of confinement in prisons, and there's this tacit assumption that like those conditions are absolutely terrible and horrendous to the point where like an 8-year-old child, like recent immigrant to the United States, is like, horrified by the idea of being in that. And I think that's like important for us to realize like how terrible those things are, and not want other people to be confined to those conditions. So it's very specific, but
It makes sense that it would come up in this context, talking together. I
Mhm.
I don't know if you know that I remember this scene as well. I don't know if we've ever talked about it, but I have like a
Mm.
slight. I don't have a. It's very similar, but it's also different in its nuances. Remember, like recall of that scene. Uh, I remember specifically what I was doing to misbehave. I probably pinched you
Mm.
or something. I
Uh-huh.
probably exerted like child violence upon another child, and
Life without parole.
mhm. That is probably what I did. It was also my birthday,
Oh my
and
God.
I remember going to our parents' room that night might have been the middle of the night, might have been, and just crying, thinking like and saying to them,
Aw.
I'm going to prison.
That's it. Oh my God.
I said to them,
Oh,
I am a bad person. I am a bad person, and I'm going to prison.
it's yeah. It's just it really is crazy how it in like the function of prison, right, in a society should be, or ideally, it's like what, rehabilitation, question mark. But functionally, it's like it just evokes fear because it's not rehabilitative. It's like I can't even I can't even imagine like being in a courtroom and being sentenced to like 3 months or something in the conditions of these prisons. It's so frightening. Sorry, that's like oddly specific, but
Do you know if it's always been the case that uh, folks in immigration detention have been placed in these conditions? Were they ever better than they are now?
I was actually reading an article about this yesterday, 2 days ago, that the New York Times published. I was like sort of heartened by the fact that they were reporting on this, but I mean the conditions have never been good, you know. But with there's like an exponential rise in so many states in the amount of immigration arrests. It's like some, in California, I remember it's like I think 140%, 160%, don't quote me on that. Same thing in Colorado. And a lot of immigration attorneys were saying that it's been like that the conditions are a lot worse than usual. I know that in Florida, in one of the prisons, some of the like defendants made like an SOS sign. Did you see this?
No.
I don't know. There's just like so many terrible things. It's like I don't even remember. But yeah, and mind you, these like there is no due process. Like that's I think that's something that should frighten everyone, right? Is like I don't care if you have no like empathy for the plight of the immigrant. We were talking about this offline, but like the fact that there is no due process should frighten anyone, right? That is like goes back to like ancient England, the Magna Carta. Like that is, it's like sort of a fundamental um, principle in any democracy. I don't even know if in non-democracies, So, anyways.
This is not the direction I want necessarily intended for us to go, but we were talking about childhood, and um, I don't know if you identify with the word radical, but I think you're someone who is radical in the sense of definitely not buying much of the mainstream discussion around much,
Mhm.
politically. I know that we both don't necessarily like love the Democratic Party. Many people don't, especially after the last election.
Mm.
But I also am noticing the fact that neither of us is pretty mainstream politically and has like taken to the fringes that fortunately are like gaining some power. New York City is the like latest example of that.
Mhm.
But a democratic socialist, which is a party that you have been involved with,
Mhm.
it's kind of like the same repeat question from earlier on, but what do you think in our childhoods
Mhm.
radicalized you? Why do you think we both came out this way? Because it was not because we had parents
Mhm.
who necessarily, ascribed to these
Right.
beliefs or these belief systems. What do you think happened to us?
You know? What I don't know. What do you think? I'll turn this question on you while I think of an answer.
So I definitely think that even if neither of our parents was um, like radical, I'll keep using. There's probably a better word we can think about, but far left or far right as a response. We could have come out far
Mhm.
left as a response to the far
Mhm.
right, but even if neither of them was like very much on the fringes, I think there were principles of justice that operated implicitly
Mhm.
in their worldviews.
Mhm.
What am I thinking about with that? I guess I'm thinking of
Oh my
mothers.
God, can I tell you what I'm thinking of when you said
Yes,
that? Principles of justice.
yes.
So Dan and I, every single Friday, mandatory field trip was to Costco Whole Scale. wholesale, wholesale, every Friday afternoon. And I think maybe once a month we would return with like, we would get like 5 gallons of milk every single time we would go. And our late father would, if he like found that one of the milks was expired, would like bring back the milk, which probably cost like what, $2. And like we would stand in line at the return place
It was a long
and
line.
make sure it was a long line. And like on a Friday afternoon, everyone's tired, but we would make sure to get that return, you know? That's what I
Yeah,
think of when I think of justice.
that's great. It's a principle of the matter. I remember also Costco, one of the foundational moments in my life. You were not there on this trip, but we, checked out with a grocery cart full of brimming with like just, produce and goods and toilet
Hmm.
paper and everything. And when we we were like walking out of Costco, I noticed because I was always tasked with reading the receipt. That's always something I was always tasked with that. Um, and I remember noticing that the carrots had been charged twice, and we only had one bag of carrots.
God forbid.
Bobby didn't even look at me. He just we grabbed the receipt, marched back, and we never went into that one particular cashier's line ever again.
That's so funny. It was like a personal wrong. It was like,
Yes.
I am wrong. This person hates me.
I think that
That's funny.
that's a good word to use for it. I think that there was a sense of like when something is
Mm.
wrong, when something is wrong.
Yes. Yeah, when you feel wronged. Yeah, 100%. I agree with that. I also think like I don't know if this is so specific to our parents, but I think so. Like there's this appreciation for congruence, like moral congruence. In I think our father was like this, or my memory of him. And I feel that way, that I try to be a good friend, a good partner, a good like person in society, I guess. Like sort of espousing the same values of like kindness, warmth, like sincerity in every facet of my life. And I think I find it hard to like espouse those values in your personal life, but then, like in your professional life or in your career, just be like devoid of those values.
Right.
Because I think everyone would agree, like, yeah, in your personal life, you should probably be kind. You should probably be empathetic. Like, why not apply those things on principle elsewhere, right?
Yes. We didn't have very working parents like other people might
Mm.
have. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Bobby retired when I was 4 and you were
Mm-hmm.
2, 3, and
Mm-hmm.
mommy worked pretty part-time. So
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm thinking about this because you're naming that, like, if whatever moral system was at work in their work life, upbringing or raising of us, and but we didn't get to see them at work too much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I mean, our mommy, hola, she's probably listening to this. Um, in like I think of her as someone who in her work, in her, career as a musical therapist, as a um like musical director in a preschool, she was like very playful, very, I think, maternal, things that she definitely was slash is with us right now. And I think that's very congruent too.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a lot of love, a lot of like understanding of that being a direction to take one's work. I don't know, maybe we'll keep
Hmm.
figuring it out with time, what radicalized us. But I think I like these initial ideas.
I'm past introspection personally, but respect it for you.
What do you mean your past introspection?
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm never
Oh,
past introspection.
okay. You have that serious joking face that I'm often told I have too, where people
Oh,
like, what
really?
were you joking, or do you get that often?
Um, yes, now that I think about it, I do.
Uh, would love to talk a little bit about, taking a couple. steps and years back about your choice of profession, your choice of turning towards the law. When did that
Mm-hmm.
become clear to you, and has the reasoning stayed the same since you decided and now that you are, really almost in the thick of it?
Yeah, I feel like if anything, I enjoy the day-to-day and the practice of it. Not that I'm practicing law for the record, but like law school, more than I would have initially have thought. I think the way that my friend and I describe it is I feel like I have like a humanities engineer brain. Like I really like when things are um there's like clarity and structure and logic applied, but not with numbers or STEM or anything. And I feel like law school is very much that. So I like legal practice in that sense. And as I think has become clear in the last 14 minutes, I feel very passionately about issues of, you know, just humanity, like basic humanity. And um, I enjoy being able to sort of apply that like the legal structure, the legal process to those issues. And also I think like it's so important to have like a very basic tenet, I think, of a functioning democracy and of like a healthy society is having the law protect those that are most vulnerable. Because if it can't protect those that are most vulnerable, like it sure as hell can't protect anyone else, you know? And so that's something that I feel very passionately about too.
Do you think that the law is a creative pursuit?
Hmm. I think so, although, stereotypically it's not considered that way, but I think it's creative in the sense that, you have your black letter law, meaning like your sort of like just think of like a very basic like criminal statute, or even like the due process clause, right, of the 14th Amendment, like no person shall be deprived of life, liberty. Wow, I should know this by heart without due process of law, or property, I think it is. And the ways, like the very creative ways that people have used that to apply, like have applied that black letter law, which is so ancient, to modern things, to like protecting gay marriage, to like protecting the rights of like unwed fathers able to see their children, protecting green card holders from being deported without like a hearing, and I think that's really creative and definitely underappreciated.
Because the original documents that don't give us much to work with when it comes to the world that we live in now. I think there's a lot of extrapolation that has to happen.
Right, right. I think like originalism, which is the school of thought that uh, a lot of our current Supreme Court ascribes to, LOL. That sort of like it means that you should look at like the literal text of the Constitution and interpreting it. And I feel like that is so myopic and also just dishonest, right? Because this country has changed dramatically since the Constitution was written. Like I probably wouldn't even be able to be here, much less be like voting or be like a law student. So yeah, it's definitely an uncreative way of viewing the law, originalism.
Got it. Is there a school of thought or any movement to this is- I don't know if I'm going to be out loud for saying this, but like replace the Constitution to find another document to
Let
be
the
the one
record
that
state we are proud to be an American, in case they
un-American.
come after us. Sorry, I cut you off. Is there like a move like to No, no, it's more like See, that's what I was talking about this with our mom the other day, is I was saying like anyone that is in law school or anyone that like ascribes to like the law as like a way to govern um would be like very aghast, I think, with what's going on with like the lawlessness of this administration. Because no matter what sort of like interpretation you ascribe to of the laws of the Constitution, like the basis is the law, right? And you really have to get creative with your legal gymnastics. That's another creativity, is like the legal gymnastics that people have been doing to like get away with the things that have been happening. But yeah, I don't, to my knowledge, there is not a movement to replace any of these legal texts, but definitely to see it as a living document rather than something that's stuck in like 1789.
That's great. I like that other term, living document. It's in the same way that we might,
Hmm.
apply old texts, old religious texts to modernity. They are used that way through interpretive
Yeah,
means.
right, exactly, exactly. I fully agree.
So we talked about the law a little bit. What specifically drew you over the course of your studies to immigration law?
Mm. That's been more of a recent um area of the law that drew me in this past year, because I did a fellowship with the International Refugee Assistance Project, IRAP, which is an excellent organization that your listeners should look into. But also, I was in a clinic that did criminal and immigration law. So there's, the immigration law is civil law, meaning that's why it's like a very interesting area of the law, because prior to 2002, it was purely civil. But with the rise of immigration detention, it has so many criminal elements to it, where like if you were to ask anyone on the street, who like a layperson, and be like, "Hey, do you think like this person that is in immigration detention, is that like person being punished?" The answer is probably yes, right? Like they're being detained. And even still, in the world of the law, in the eyes of the law, that is like civil law. And so those people, like people that are in immigration detention, aren't entitled to constitutional protections that criminal defendants are. And I felt very passionately about defense work for a really long time. I think because my starting my first semester of law school, like among my first weeks until the very end, I was really involved in the Innocence Project that we had in my law school, and it was the first time I visited a prison and actually spoke with people that are like in prison for life. Um, and I think there's one thing that is thinking like in the abstract about how terrible a prison is or a jail is, and the other thing is actually visiting there and like speaking to people that are in those conditions, and that was really radicalizing for me. Um, and I remember this one quote by a public defender that I really respected, which is someone asked her like, "Why are you a public defender?" And she said, "Because I know that every single person imprisoned is a son or a daughter of someone else." And she's like, "As a mother, I cannot allow that to happen." And that was so beautiful, right? Because if you visit any of these facilities, this includes immigration detention facilities and also, prisons, like criminal prisons, criminal jails. I I think it really does inspire a lot of compassion and empathy when you think about that like all these people are brothers, sisters, friends, daughters, sons. And yeah, so I knew that I wanted to either do criminal defense, and I got a job with the public defender office here in Colorado. And then I also got this offer for a fellowship doing removal defense here in Colorado. And I decided on the latter because, you know, the current situation really lends itself, like, we need a lot of deportation defense right now. And yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited, also terrified for it.
There was some concern in our family conversations when you were choosing between those two roles, between, criminal defense and deportation defense, and the concern was that it would be a very taxing role for you, like in general, that I think anyone who has a family member who's going into work that's very grueling and difficult morally and emotionally is concerned for them when they go into that. Is that a concern for you right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought this up because I think for a really long time, whenever people would say things along the lines of like, you can't pour from an empty cup and like you have to take care of yourself before you take care of others. I always listened to that. I was like, okay, stop. Like you know, this doesn't apply to me. I always thought it was like a very privileged quote unquote thing to say. And then earlier this year, I had a lot of health challenges. January was a really difficult month for me. And I think the root cause of it was like not at all making time for myself. I was pouring from like a not even an empty cup, but like the glass wasn't even there, you know? And I think that really taught me that you do have to take care of yourself, if you are gonna be in these positions, of trying to advocate for other people because I was at such a low point that I couldn't be there for, not even just like my clinic clients. I really tried to, but also like as a friend, as a partner. So yeah, I definitely think about that a lot. And I'm
What
trying to
is
be
the
proactive about that.
Okay? What is the word you use the word advocacy or to advocate? I don't know if you find it as interesting a word as I do, considering that um, in Spanish, lawyer is abogado, and
Mm.
I'm gonna just take an etymological guess right now and say that's sort of
Please.
related to advocate. Um,
Mm.
even if it's not, even if it's not, but I'm assuming it is. What do you understand by advocate or advocate or advocacy?
Mm. I think it's using like the privileges that we have to speak up for other people that aren't afforded those privileges. I mean, a very like literal example of this is people in prison that quite literally cannot. A very interesting area of the law, if anyone wants to do a Wikipedia deep dive, is the First Amendment rights of prisoners. And yeah, quite literally, like a lot of people in prison cannot speak up for themselves, can't advocate for themselves, not even just with their views about the world, about their conditions, but even like in court, people don't know their rights because they weren't taught their rights. And I think a love language for me is using my like professional knowledge of the law um, to like I think, you know, marginalized people, very, very vulnerable people in society need people with myriad skills, right? Like need people that are um, like therapists and lawyers, I think too, doctors, teachers, educators, and this sort of goes back to why I was drawn to law school, but I do love like the process, like the day to day of like writing a brief or like the process, like civil procedure. I'm like a nerd and I find that really interesting. And to be able to use those skills that I find fun to serve like a humanistic purpose. And I think that's advocacy.
Are there specific cases that you hold close and dear of folks that you've worked with?
Mm, I think a lot about the first time that I went to a prison. Um, which was my like one of the first weeks of law school for me and when I was working for the Innocence Project, which I alluded to before. And it's like a 3-hour drive to the Sterling Correctional Facility from Boulder. And on the way there, I was pretty nervous because, one thing is like talking with my friends or my colleagues and about like collective liberation, the rights of defendants. And also I had this like visceral anxiety about, being in a room with someone who was convicted of like first degree murder. And when we met our client, um, it was the most like humanizing, like lovely conversation. And given the fact that this person had been in prison for like over 3 decades, like, and also like the claim of innocence, right? With like a very credible claim of innocence, and the fact that someone in those conditions is able to retain their humanity, and not only that, but just like be such a lovely person, such a lovely host. um, I was very, very moved by that. Um, and yeah, I can't imagine myself being in that situation where like you are just utterly voiceless, like just at the whims of the system that like wants to keep you in.
Were you able to express that awe and wonder at his disposition?
Yeah, I did. I sent him a letter. He sent me a letter. And I got him a few books. That's maybe the only good thing about Amazon is they offer shipments to some prisons. So I don't know the details of that exactly, but they do.
Oh, Amazon, yeah. What books
Yeah,
did
shout
you?
out Social Justice Institution, Amazon.
What books did you send?
I honestly don't remember. It was a self-help book, like the one that I'm remembering, but I'm
Okay,
forgetting.
that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've been talking around this, wanted just to dig into it more explicitly. You seem to hold a very special and you seem to hold the law very dear when it's working well and when it's an institution that serves to order and give logic to and
Mhm.
to care for people in society. And at the same time, it's not been that for a while in the States, especially now.
Mhm.
How do you feel about working in a system that is so contrary often to the esteem to which you hold the law?
Yeah. I feel anxious about it, honestly. I've been holding a lot of anxiety these days. Um, because like this whole thing, by this whole thing I mean like this democracy can't work if like the very people in power don't respect the democracy, right? There's this quote that my friend says a lot. I don't think it's an original quote, but he says liberal democracy never existed, but you'll miss it when it's gone. I think that's so good, and that's sort of what I'm feeling right now. So yeah, I'm feeling anxious. How are you feeling from afar?
Yeah, so I am afar. I feel like it's not been this bad in a while. At the same time, I continue to have this confirmation bias. What I want to confirm is that it'll survive. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm more attending to news about things being struck down or limits
Mm-hmm.
being placed. And I think that we've definitely have examples of both, right? Of like we were talking
Yeah.
about the Supreme Court case recently regarding injunctions, and
Mm-hmm.
that's definitely one that falls in the category of things are going to shit.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also much to point to that suggests that these systems will hold. At the same time, I'm also not someone who's like ever been a fan of the systems that have been in
Yeah.
place.
Right, right. That's sort of what I meant with like liberal democracy never existed, but you'll miss it when it's gone. Um, yeah, it's yeah, it's hard because I also agree that a lot of these systems like weren't serving people, right? And like even before Trump, I was like, this needs to be addressed. But now it's like just whole scale like lawlessness and that's not what anyone's at. It's like, oh well, you wanted to like tear it down. It's like actually this is not what anyone meant by that. But I mean, to your point about some areas of like hope, I'm in the great state of Colorado, and I am so moved by the Colorado state and local government. I feel, I was talking to my partner's mom about this earlier, but like, I just feel so grateful to be in a state where I feel like our elected officials care a great deal about their constituents, try to protect their constituents. Um, and yeah, I think we're seeing that a lot. Sort of like it's sort of up to each state at this point, which is really scary, actually.
What is a liberal democracy?
Oh my God, I wish I knew. Um, it's, liberalism is like there's a lot of ways to define it, right? But it's I think I when I think about it, I think of this like post World War II like allied powers trying to construct in after like fascism killed so much, sort of like trying to create a world order that was protective, and I think a lot of that was nominal in many ways. And yeah, you have like these institutions that are in theory supposed to protect people, but that, you know, in actuality, like functionally aren't weren't doing their jobs.
But it's an aspiration, in other words.
Yeah, and I think like the failures of liberalism, like I think liberalism can be really hollow and superficial, and I feel like it's very clear that people feel that way, right? Like I think it's very hard to like I'm trying to think of like an institution, like I don't know, like healthcare, in this country is like the institution of healthcare is a joke. It's like not serving absolutely anyone. And I feel like everyone can agree on that. And that's something that like spurs a lot of resentment. And I feel like the way, this none of this is like an original thought, obviously, but I I feel like people with power and people with like perverse motives are exploiting that resentment and that anger. And this country doesn't have such a unified resistance movement of any sort, or even like, our supposed like left wing is like question mark. Like, I don't even know where they are. So, but by that I mean the Democratic Party. So yeah, it's hard.
How were you drawn to DSA initially, to Democratic Socialists of America?
Well, it's not so much like the name, like to me, like democratic socialism, I'm like, okay, what is that? Like it means a lot of different things to different people, but what I am really drawn to is this feeling of community, of mutual aid. Like it just takes so many forms. I'm the co-chair of the Housing Justice Committee, and I'm always like so inspired when we have our meetings at the public library, how it's such an intergenerational group of people from like all walks of life, from Colorado, not from Colorado, students, not students, like older, retired, like just entering into their career. Um, and also like broadly, the group itself, like speaking of moral congruence, like people are kind and warm and caring about the very people in DSA, but also like people in their community. Like one of our members in the Housing Justice Committee recently had a baby, and we did like a chapter-wide meal train for them, and just like really showing up for people. And I feel like it's pretty rare these days, right? When everything is like online, it's hard to find those spaces of like genuine community. And I'm really grateful to have found a bit of that in DSA.
I
Do you
think it's a
feel
great.
like, sorry,
Go ahead.
do you feel like you find more of those spaces in Argentina? And whatever your answer to that is, do you feel like there's some sort of connection between that and like the current climate in the US?
And by spaces like that, you mean spaces of political community.
Just community generally.
The one group that comes to mind immediately for me is a pretty nonpartisan group. It's pretty explicitly nonpartisan because it's more
Yeah.
issue based, and it's sought to be nonpartisan because it wants to not exclude anyone in this like pretty bitterly partisan nation, from people who want to be part of this issue but don't want to necessarily uh, be around any insinuations of partisanship. So it's explicitly nonpartisan to unite as many people as possible around this issue, and the issue is land restoration in the city of Buenos Aires, specifically a plot of land in the barrio of Palermo, in the neighborhood of Palermo, that has been vacant for many years. It used to belong to the National Railroad company or industry, and it's been vacant because that railroad line, which is still operational, was elevated around 30 or 40 years ago, and so the plot of land right below it has been just vacant, and in a pretty like coveted area of the city. And this organization was born many years ago, at least 2 decades ago, to sort of press for that land to become, first the proposal was an urban forest, then a park, then some sort of community publicly owned land. And I came into contact with this organization recently, towards the end of last year, and I joined it, and I've been part of the like steering committee, well, like the general steering committee, which unites some architects. Mostly, it's been a lot of architects who join it. Architects, to not say urban planners, but they're mostly just architects. Plus, folks with different skill sets that are interested in this becoming a reality. And it's been an uphill climb, as most issues tend to be. I joined it because I was not feeling much community around political issues. It's one of the harder parts, I would say, or one of the unfulfilling parts of living abroad for me, because I am someone who considers himself very political. It's been dispiriting to find that I'm not as called to the struggles, not because they don't appeal to me on an emotional level, but because it's hard for me to think of what my involvement could look like in in a foreign political system. Foreign, even though we were born here, but it's still
Lol, yeah.
it's still foreign because I wasn't politicized here, you know. So I joined this group wanting to like have somewhere to a vessel for that desire to be participating communally in the betterment of the place I live. And it's been great. I've really enjoyed being part of it, even if it's frustrating because it's a lot of people at the same time trying to do the same thing, and as organizations can be,
Yeah,
disorganized sometimes. But it's been nice to be with people who believe in something similar to you, who share a value system.
for sure. And I I wonder if this is also something that gets on your nerves, but whenever someone says like, "Oh, you think like your actions are you think you're gonna like solve the world's crises or something and like save the world," and it's like, no, like that, like it's like, do you think I'm that naive? But it's like, what? So like this is the end of history? Like we're all resigned to like determinism or whatever? It's like, there's something so beautiful about a group of people coming together with like a shared hope, right? And faith. I think that's so wonderful. And um, yeah, it's interesting that I didn't know that that was something that you were like explicitly struggling with, was finding that political community, because in my mind, I see Argentina as a country that is like very socially evolved as far as like political movements go. And I think the United States can learn a lot from like organized movement, right?
Yeah, no, I'm definitely not disagreeing with that. I'm wondering what you see what social evolution you see here.
I think a lot about like the ways that the dirty war is remembered collectively in Argentina. Um, just so explicitly, right? And I feel like this country has very little collective like reckoning or remembrance. It has like the short-term memory loss for lots of things, right? For lots of bad things. For the great things, you know, like July 4th is coming up. Everyone remembers that, but do we remember like the internment of Japanese Americans? Likely not. And I
There's
think
just so much to remember in the
there
state.
there is so much to remember. But yeah, I think about that a lot. Like I'm very moved by that in Argentina.
I have definitely seen lots of reassuring movements and tendencies here too. So I'm not disagreeing with that at all. Even
Mhm.
though, for instance, this virtue that you name in the population has been put to the test with the current administration. You know,
Mhm.
both countries currently are being racked by fascism, and one of the strains of this fascism is that it participates in something that's been named here, like social amnesia, to describe it
Mhm.
like the short term memory loss that you're
Yeah, that's a good
or short
word.
term memory. So it's like the rallying cry is no a la amnesia social, right? Like no
I love that.
to social amnesia, and often like murals that will be saying a simple message, which is son 30,000, they were 30,000, which is a
Mhm.
reference to the victim count
Mhm.
of the military dictatorship, because that
Yeah.
number has been contested by the current administration. So it's like
Oh my God.
you see that on just publicly on murals and in graffiti. So that's definitely something I appreciate too. There's a lot of memory, memoria, verdad y justicia, memory,
Mhm.
truth, and justice is a booming movement. Plus, protest culture is really beautiful. There is just a lot of agotamiento. There's a lot of help me out.
Like exhaustion.
Yeah, that's it. There's a lot of exhaustion right now.
Mhm.
Going to what you were saying about, or what are we supposed to just get resigned to what the state of affairs is right now?
Mhm.
Well, don't we all feel pushed to do that sometimes? Just be like, fuck,
Mhm.
done, out
Yeah.
with it, done, I'm done here.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I, yeah, I'm trying to like walk that line myself with like, I feel like every social engagement that I have, I feel like I need to talk about like the latest like Thomas Friedman column. And I'm like, have you seen this? You know, or like the latest whatever. And it's like, maybe I should talk about the fucking weather, you know, like for once. And I think there is some like importance in that. But yeah, I think it is like a delicate equilibrium for me. But something else that I was talking about this last night, like, you know, I wish it wasn't up to like us civilians to have to talk about these things all the time when like the very people that should be doing their jobs, like shout out Chuck Schumer. Like why isn't like he is being paid by taxpayer money to like, you know, be the backstop, right? And so yeah, it's like I wish I could micromanage the institutions that be, but unfortunately, I don't have that power yet. So,
Mo- Many politicians, I think an outsized number of politicians were lawyers or are lawyers also, which is interesting. I know I was thinking about this with
mm,
regards to psychology or other fields. Like, why is there not as much of what's the word? A pipeline from these fields
yeah,
to politics? Um, I don't know why.
yeah. I think it's important to have, you know, knowledge of the law and and all that, but I think it has attracted a specific subset of lawyers. I'll leave that there. But our current president is not a law school grad, so you know.
Oh. And that's why
There
we're
we
doing
go.
so well.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So we need more real estate moguls.
Want to take a step back again
Mm.
and head to your first year of law school. We talked about
Mhm.
this, a while ago. There's a big push in law school, or if not a push by the law school, just by watching others around you around one who head into careers where the, that use the law and that operate around the law and maybe even include some of that logic and creativity and clarity that you were naming, but they use it for profit means or for
Very low.
sustaining systems that are not necessarily helping
Yeah.
us out. What was there a big push towards that when you were making these important decisions, and what was your decision like to sort of stay in the public, is it the public good as opposed to for profit?
Oh, I love that. I think that's such a lovely way of putting it. It's public interest, is what people
Okay.
say. But I think we should start saying public good and have that stick. But yeah, I mean it's certainly a pipeline. I think for a lot of reasons. A, because those opportunities are what pay. Like you could, like if we're talking numbers, you could have a summer internship working for a, big law firm earning upwards of 40K, over 40K in a summer as a first year law student. Most people are in debt being in law school. Or you could go and work for the public defender's office and probably not earn anything and be further in debt, right? Paying your rent and everything. And not even to speak of like the ways that these big law firms like wine and dine all their associates and they pay for bar prep and they pay for like these months of no income and uh, so that that's like a huge incentive, right? And it's hard to say no to that. And that's why I always caution people and myself against like having any sort of resentment towards law students that go to those opportunities because I feel very fortunate that I got a scholarship for law school, but if I was in debt for law school, I mean, certainly like I would take that. And so yeah, I think it's really appealing. I think it's sort of like the current, and you have to swim against the current if you want to, because it's sort of like an irrational choice, right? Like, oh, let me like get further in debt and do this like really grueling job. Um, that's like in some ways an irrational choice, but I think it's context specific if you want to go with that.
Yeah, that's a very um, generous and well-rounded way of observing that choice. I appreciate that. It's not as simple as just saying, you went for profit, darn you.
Yeah, sell out. Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. Was there anything else you wanted to be when you were little? I probably can remember, but help me out.
Um, I remember wanting to be a marine biologist. LOL. My partner right now is a biologist. Hi, Will. I hope he's listening to this as a test. Will, if you are listening to this, then text me a heart emoji. But anyways, yeah, I wanted to be a marine biologist because we grew up in Miami and I remember we went to this field trip to see loggerhead turtles and I thought that shit was so cool. And like, I remember this one girl was working there and she was like really chill and I was like, I want to do this. And then I took 1 week of biology when I was in college and I was like, absolutely not.
You
Um,
dropped the class?
yes. And I fully pivoted. um, and became very involved in the history department. Um, yeah, and well, to that point, I really thought about like cognitive neuroscience when I was in college. Again, coming from this place of like social justice and feeling very passionately about working with I remember feeling passionately about working with people with addiction and over spring break, my first summer, I worked at this addiction rehab center. Um, but yeah, what about you?
Anything else I considered being?
Hmm.
I definitely wanted to be a musician.
Hmm.
I wanted to be
Yeah.
Diego. I wanted to be Diego Torres. Um,
Oh,
yeah, well, you know that when our parents went on their honeymoon and we were, you know, alive and well, or by that point,
Yeah.
we they tasked me. I don't remember what coping strategy they gave you, but I was distraught at their leaving for a week, and they gave me the task of learning a song by Diego Torres, Color Esperanza, The Color of Hope, or Hope's Color. By the time they came back,
God.
and I was like my first gig, um,
Okay.
and I definitely had that fantasy for a while. I was pretty crazy about it, I think, for a bit. I never really did anything to get there. You know, I went to
Um,
piano classes
you
and
literally
guitar classes.
auditioned for The Voice.
Oh my God, you're right. I did. I did do that. And no one's taken down the videos to my deep dismay. But I did pursue that once. And I also auditioned for a cappella in college. So I guess it was just it didn't choose me. But that's
Yes.
fine. That's fine.
But I
I'm still
remember you from very early on expressing a very deep interest in psychology.
Yeah, it was the thing I applied to college with, child psychology, and I pretty soon after starting college, dropped that because I wasn't appreciating the approach that was taken in the courses I was in. You know, pretty like
Mhm.
quantitative and pathologizing approach. So I took like a really broad detour through political science, which I think is concerned with many of the same questions that should concern psychology around how do people build good lives,
Mhm.
whether through the systems that they live in or through their own cognitive abilities. So I think it's getting at the same question. But yeah, so I feel pretty early on that psychology was it. But I don't know. I feel like I could be
Mhm.
many things. Don't you? Like, uh,
Mhm.
I don't know which one I was thinking about the other day. Well, I definitely thought about law at one point in college too. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah.
I'd love to be a high school history teacher.
Mm,
If I fail the bar, that's where I will pivot to.
that's a great backup plan.
Yeah.
I think that we should have another one of these sometime soon.
Yeah, I would love that so much. Can't wait
Thank
to
you.
hear my own voice and be traumatized.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna have to see if the audio worked for the first half because I made a
Carol.
mistake
Okay.
with the selection of a microphone, but it should probably be fine, or I'm just gonna spend a lot of time editing it. We'll see.
And that is okay.
Thank you so much for
Okay.
spending this time together, and even as you're preparing for the bar.
I'm so honored. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. If this conversation resonated with you, consider reviewing Therapy for the World or sharing the link with someone who might appreciate it. Until next time, speak with care and listen deeply.